The Genesis mission is like bank the unbanked, create the new economic layer, create new money that works for all people, democratize the internet, right? And diving deep into some of those narratives, like go to the places where trust is broken, where traditional finance is either not functioning at its best or it's just missing huge gaps of populations. And what's the biggest block in the world? That's Africa.
Welcome to the Regeneration Will Be Funded. This is a show about regenerative finance. We are exploring pathways to a life-affirming economy. I am your host, Matthew Monahan, and today's guest is my friend, a recurring guest, Yoseph Ayele. He is the founder and managing partner at Lava. Welcome, Yoseph, back to the show.
Thanks for having me again, Matthew.
Yeah, you were one of the early guests in season 1. We're back here, and you are helping us be the final guest of season 3, the final guest of 2024, the final one of the day. We just redid all the lights to just for the fact that it's dark outside. I must admit my speech faculties are running about 20%, but we're going to give this a good shot.
Well, you've been in a marathon here in Bangkok at DEF CON, so...
Yeah. How's your DEF CON been?
It's been full on. It's been really amazing. There's just a lot happening, a lot of energies and people. It's amazing to host this in Southeast Asia, where you bump into people from this side of the world that we don't get to see in other Ethereum events around the world.
Right.
And DEF CON is always the most curated, the most intentional Ethereum event that we have around. So you just get to see a lot of the love and energy and community vibes that exist in the space. And for me personally, it is an event where I've been pushing to have more African voices and energies represented, and we have 177 folks who flew in.
Wow.
Despite all the visa and crazy immigration cycles that people went through. It's still a tiny drop in the ocean, but it's a big deal. We've been hosting a lot of side events and sessions. Yesterday, we held Africa Day at the Global Majority Hub, and Aya Miyaguchi and Vitalik came by to welcome all the African folks, and she was in tears, and there were a whole lot of people just emotional about this many Africans being embedded into the Ethereum community and the Ethereum world, feeling like this is the most interesting conversation happening here that is focused on real world adoption and work, not just research for the sake of research. So, yes, it's been amazing, full on, emotional, and fantastic.
So for the last couple of years now, you've really been on a mission, as I understand it, to connect Web3 and Africa together to bring more of the African builders and the Ethereum ecosystem into closer coherence and alignment. It's interesting. I remember you saying Africa doesn't need crypto, crypto needs Africa. And while here at DevCon, I've had at least 2 different people say that besides you. And it's interesting to see it pinging and being understood and recognized in the space. But yeah, maybe take us through what have these last couple of years looked like and where's the project at so far?
Yeah, so I guess when I got into crypto, started learning, diving deep, being a bit degen myself, and just understanding a lot of the mechanics, how the space is getting built and what is the roadmap long term. And just diving deeper, what became very clear to me is that a lot of the fundamental problems we are trying to solve with crypto so far have actually generally work in developed countries and advanced economies. Banking generally works for the normal person. Um, Maybe you and I and others care a lot about privacy, about custodying our funds, and when like black swan events happen, then we get harmed, or when governments print money. But generally speaking, the system works. And so then who are we building for, and where is the target? And the Genesis mission is like bank the unbanked, create the new economic layer, create new money that works for all people, democratize the internet, right? Um, and diving deep into some of those narratives, like go to the places where trust is broken, where traditional finance is either not functioning at its best or it's just missing huge gaps of populations. And what's the biggest block in the world? That's Africa.
Mm.
We have 1.5 billion people. The whole population is doubling in the next 20 years. That is adding two whole Europes. The median age is 19 today,
Mhm.
and about 600 million Africans are under the age of 14, right? So we've never seen this type of demographics in human history before,
Wow.
right? And um, yeah, we've had a lot of amazing innovations with Web 2. We've skipped landlines with mobile phones. You know, you have a place where there's huge penetration. I think over 78% of the adult population has a mobile phone, and about half of that has smartphones, and it's growing 6% year over year. Like that's changed completely. Like the size and scale of connectivity. Like I learned most things online when I was growing up in Ethiopia and Kenya. And I learned most of my English on the internet. That has been very transformative. But when it comes to the communication of value, then that's where we work through walls. As amazing the internet has been at democratizing knowledge and information, transfer of value happens over walls. And it's like the old system of calling operators to connect you with someone on the other side of the world. And you're working with intermediaries, and it's a lot of trust based systems, right? So when these things are really not functioning as well, um, we have massive gaps. And this is not created, actually, the gaps are not being filled by crypto necessarily. It just happens to be a technology that has emerged at a time when the Web2 tools are in a good place, and those two brought together has been a great merge that has basically driven crypto adoption at a very large scale across Africa.
Mm.
And even in the bear market, crypto transactions were growing really fast in Africa. So
How many people in Africa are using Web3 roughly?
it's hard to say. In some of the major, so Africa's 54 countries, many different economies. So I track some of the major ones like South Africa, Nigeria, which has the highest population, is 250 million people. It's overtaking America in the next 20 years.
Wow.
Look at Kenya, look at Ethiopia, and it ranges between 10 to 20% of the entire population has
Mm.
interacted with crypto in a number of these places. But it's hard to track because when you sign up for a self custody wallet, you're not entering your location,
Right.
right? You can track MetaMask application downloads, but and that's the beauty of crypto. Like you
Mm.
don't know. That's the nature of it, right?
Right.
But when you see a place where like Nigeria that has a
Mhm.
lot of dysfunctions, um, where the crypto transactions that are recorded,
Mhm.
which is only the tip of the iceberg, makes up about 15% of the country's GDP, then you gotta start thinking, right? When the US dollar stablecoin price is the reference price for dollars in the open market, then it's a very different scenario. When you find more than 40% of all the crypto transactions recorded are in stablecoins, then it shows you it's actually utility driven. It's not just speculating meme coins.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so it's been growing a lot over the last many years,
Mhm.
and it is, and it's the most interesting area for smart developers.
Got it. So you've identified this, I guess, meta trend, and then you've been putting together a fund as well as a residency program, as I
Right,
understand it, and events. And yeah, take us through some of the high level activities.
right. So establishing the fact that there's a lot the African market can contribute to crypto, Ethereum, and all major ecosystems, um, and a lot of the innovations with Web3 are not going to be built in Silicon Valley
Mm.
specifically for Africa. maybe some infrastructure research. Um, but in terms of the interface with the person, the interface with the businesses and banks and the economy itself, it is just going to be extremely hard and impossible for someone across the world to build it and scale it across 54 countries.
Mm.
Um, and so this is going to be built bottom up, designed for this specific user base, right? And so for that then to happen, capital is a very important element of it. And so I like to look at it from a lens of coordination. Uh, if we're building our financial system as a stack
Mm.
of interoperable modular pieces,
Right.
then first we gotta coordinate the people building it. We gotta coordinate the tools. We gotta be building on top of each other. And so over the last year plus, I've been developing this program called Magma um, for the most exceptional founders and developers from across Africa to come together
Mhm.
for a very intensive 2 weeks. The whole purpose is just us coordinate. What are you building? What am I building? What are we optimizing for? What are the patterns you have learned from your country, my
Mm.
place?
Mhm.
Um, how have you solved this technical or non-technical challenge when you're making digital assets composable with non-digital assets? You
Mhm.
know, where smart money and dumb money interface. That's where a lot of the innovation is at. So Magma has become a coordination point of the smartest builders, and it's a community. It's got elements of fellowship. It's got elements of an accelerator. A lot of lessons we borrowed from Y Combinator built, which is just a place for the best builders to build on top of each other. Like that's how success is engineered in some ways.
Totally.
And so that's how we're designing it. That's a public goods initiative, um, because you can bottle community. You can't bottle the magic
Mm.
that's happening here, right?
Mhm.
So we gotta let it be and set it free.
Mm.
And we have 48 builders in the community right now, 27 startups, a new cohort every 6 months
Nice.
that is joining the ecosystem. And we're getting very close of
Mm.
actually building a solid stack of all the major financial service and trust services that you need to function across Africa. And about 5% of all stablecoin transactions in Africa are now happening through the Magma projects.
Wow.
Um, and on the other side, I run a fund, a venture fund called Lava, Magma and Lava, and we can dive into the names. And that's its just own vehicle that uses capital as a coordination tool. So first is the human coordination, and the other one is using capital as coordinating the landscape, where a lot of projects that are going down the venture track.
Mm.
Not everyone needs to, by the way, and I'm a big proponent of people building things that don't need external venture money.
Mm.
That's great. If you can do that, that's fantastic. But if you do, having aligned funds that understand the landscape, that understands crypto, and also have a long-term lens in mind is very critical. And I started that based out of frustration of just the lack of global capital being deployed in the most interesting market where we're seeing utility at scale,
Mm.
um, and a lot of capital going to projects that kind of are like the X of Africa, that are really good at selling, but not the best at executing.
Mm.
Um, or some of the funds that we have in crypto that are more based on token speculation. So 3 to 5 year or some 7 year funds that just don't have the patience to be long enough to build the plumbing of the continent's economy. And so Lava exists as an independent fund that backs companies that are focused in the African market, working with Web3, working with frontier technologies,
Mm.
and building the fundamental problems across simple finance and trust.
Nice. Who are some of the LPs inside that fund?
So we've used the fund. It's a $15 million fund. Kept it small and intentionally small. One because it's my first fund,
Mm.
and second, small funds perform the best. And third is that it's a new market for a whole lot of people, right? So it's a foot in the door. to
Mhm.
understand the landscape, to prove the model and the thesis. And so we use the fund as a vehicle to collect the best relationships we can
Mm.
to come along the journey. So we've been collecting relationships, not money, in building the fund. And we've been very fortunate to get an incredible group of minds who want to see crypto succeed and who want to see Africa succeed, from Brian Armstrong, Fred Ursum, and Matt Huang, who founded Paradigm, or
Mm.
some of our LPs. We've got the founders of Polygon, Cello, Centrifuge, Notion, Huobi, African family offices, early Ethereum, Bitcoin researchers, other funds and GPs of funds as
Mm.
well have come in. So, in a crazy way, this mission and work has attracted some of the most visionary people in the landscape,
Mhm.
unless the money optimizers over a short period of time. Um, and we're closing the fund in March next year, and using capital to accelerate the innovations that are coming up from the bottom up and lining up follow-on investors for our portfolio companies.
Right. No, it makes a lot of sense. US obviously has had a pretty adversarial policy and compliance relationship with crypto in the last few years. Um, we're recording this shortly after the Trump election. We'll see what
Mhm.
happens in kind of the US policy settings. Where are these different countries in Africa at with the crypto markets? Is it being embraced? Is it being resisted? Yeah, obviously, you can't necessarily overgeneralize across the entire continent, but yeah, curious a bit more on that.
So there's a real answer and a politically correct answer. Uh, I'm just gonna be real. There's part of it that matters and part of it doesn't matter,
Mm,
because uh, crypto has thrived despite regulation,
mm,
not as a result of regulation. That's not to say regulation doesn't matter. It's very important, um, because to build the plumbing, today we had a panel, and one of our panelists called it sort of the train tracks of how value moves around the continent and between
mm,
the continent and the world. And to have that scale at the size of a local economy,
mm,
you need to work with regulators.
mhm,
And so there are some regulators who have been, yeah, this is amazing, let's get behind it, and
mm,
created very clear frameworks, like South Africa, um, and Kenya and Zambia and Nigeria and Ghana are now developing sandboxes. Um, and there are other countries that have completely banned it and made it illegal. Um, but it's still a gray area in a bunch of countries, and trying to figure out. And if I see the world from regulators' eyes, it can pose a huge threat, which is capital flight, or a bunch of money flowing in a space that you cannot actually regulate and track and control, right? So those are important questions that you got to address.
mhm,
Um, but on the other side, there's a lot that regulators can actually benefit from this space and innovation. When you have 13 African countries that don't even control their monetary policy, that half of every forex reserve that they have is kept in the French treasury, that they don't set their interest rates, right? Um, then the question of sovereignty is not about people getting sovereignty from governments. It's actually governments trying to get sovereignty from other governments,
mm,
right? And so that is one area that, like, creative thinking in this space can really support the core functions of what the governments are there to do,
mm,
whether you agree with the views of the government in place or not.
mm,
So it's a moving target for many of us. Early this year, last year, Nigeria made decriminalized crypto. Early this year, it banned it again because the Nigerian naira went down 50% in 1 month. And a lot, like, speculation had something to do with it as well. And so the engine knows how to respond, which is stop, ban. We can't allow
mm,
fiat to move to crypto and vice versa.
mhm,
Um, that did not stop volumes. Volumes were going through the roof. $55 billion were transacted in Nigeria in the last 12 months, right? So it's, in a way, like,
yeah.
it matters, but also people will do what people do.
Yeah. So, what are some of the key focus areas or aspects of that stack that you guys are seeking to build and fund that gets you most excited?
So there's one element of it, which is um, Africa is a massive continent, 54 countries. Let's say you live in Tanzania, I live in Kenya,
Mm,
neighboring countries, both our currencies are called shillings.
mm,
We even speak the same language, or our national language is Swahili. So both speak the same. Um, if you and I are engaged in any type of commerce, um, I have to convert Kenyan shillings to dollars. Our bank communicates to the central bank, uses SWIFT, money flows to the UK, to New York, comes back over, depending on how much volume we're trading, like transacting, probably between 10 to 15% of the total value is lost in the process.
wow.
It takes days, or in terms of how much we're asking for, it might take weeks. We might even be on the same payment application,
Wow.
but that is the existing process that we're going. Another way of looking at it is you live in California, I live in Texas. We can talk over the phone, but if we're engaging in any type of economic activity, we can't do it directly. Value has to flow through India,
Mhm,
go to rupees, and then back to American dollars on the other side. If that was the state of being in the
mhm.
United States,
Yeah,
then people go crazy, right? So that is the level of craziness of reality that we're in right now.
yeah.
And in a place where more than 60% of our economy isn't happening in the informal sector, so it's
Mhm,
happening outside of the banking system, right? Then basically the plumbing is broken of how a lot of value moves between all these different countries. So there's one aspect of it, which is okay, we got to plug better into the global economy because we consume and we produce,
mhm,
right? We produce content, we produce goods and services, coffee, like all the things that the world uses comes from Africa,
mm,
right? So there's a lot of that intersection that happens. You have a young, talented person living in Nigeria who happens to teach themselves how to code, has a GitHub page, contributes to things internationally. There's no way you can pay them directly at the
mm.
moment. PayPal doesn't want to work in Nigeria. Stripe doesn't work in Nigeria, right? So the people who even hire local talent find it so hard to like, how do I pay you? Right? The banking rails, they kind of work, but it's just so clunky,
Mm,
right? And so, yeah, there's an aspect of just we need to find better ways of communicating for people to even find value from the rest of the world,
yeah,
right? Otherwise, you just have capital flight. There's a
yeah,
talent flight. Like myself, I had to
mm,
leave home,
right,
right? And I think that hurts the local economy, whether you believe in capitalism or not. Like, you want smart people who can be productively active in building their country from the bottom up. So there's that element of it,
mm,
right?
mhm,
There's the other element of it, which is like how do we measure value? Like, if you have a local money that keeps losing value over weeks and months, right? It's very unstable. Then people move to dollars,
mhm,
and the easiest way to move to dollar is the U.S. dollar stablecoin right now. Now, I find it hard to see a world where we dollarize our entire economies. Then we're basically handing over sovereignty to stimulate our economies,
mm,
right? So, if we're still operating with a monetary system that we use to pay for things, to buy a house, borrow, or have
mhm,
small businesses, then we got to find some solution for that,
mhm,
right? And so I think some of the most interesting areas of innovation is to build actual local stablecoins, bringing some of our local money on chain to make it easy to transact with each other, but also move the dollar from being the medium of exchange, how Tanzania and Kenya can trade with each other, but you can use it as a unit of account. How Tanzanian shilling is valued, Kenyan shilling is valued, but you and I can actually transact directly
mm,
with our local stablecoins through on-chain liquidity pools
mhm,
without touching the dollar directly. I think that's very interesting. I think we've got to find better ways of bringing more sovereignty
Mm.
to us, instead of actually giving up sovereignty in one direction. And these things are just hard to centrally architect. And I
Right.
cannot sit here and claim to know all the best answers for these.
Mm.
But um, the answer is not some crypto wallet built somewhere else in the world that everyone is just going to plug into.
Yeah.
Right? We got to build these things from the bottom up, from first principles, and that's what we're most excited to back and be part of.
Nice. So are there examples of portfolio companies, or what are some of the things that people are building that you're paying attention to right now?
So we've backed so far 7 companies, and we're looking at more. Some of the most interesting abstractions of user experience challenge in
Mm.
crypto, in my opinion, are happening in Africa right now, because the African user has very low tolerance
Mm.
to bad experience, and expecting you to be a believer of crypto, or expecting you to know how to navigate all the bonanza that you have to navigate. And so everyone focuses on reducing complexity
Mm.
and creating more abstraction.
Mhm.
So one of the companies that we backed facilitates easy payments for cross-border payments within Africa, and they're doing it through US dollar stablecoins. But the most interesting thing that they did is they created a protocol that basically aggregates various types of fiat liquidity providers and crypto liquidity providers. Where if you are, again, let's use the example, you're in Tanzania, I'm in Kenya, you say, I want to send Yosef $10 worth of Kenyan shillings. You put my phone number in Kenya, which is my M-Pesa account. M-Pesa is a mobile money application.
Mhm.
We can talk about that. I think it's very interesting.
Mm.
Um, and then basically what that protocol does is it sends that request to the local liquidity providers to then sell the fiat to a stable coin. And then the stable coin is then put on auction on the Kenyan side to fiat. And then that fiat is transferred to my account in less than 5 minutes with just one single transaction.
Mm.
You don't even know this has been done on crypto rails. You're just sending money directly to me
Right.
in less than 5 minutes, less than $1 of transaction. That's fixed rate that they have. So $10 probably doesn't make sense to do
Mm.
so. But if you're doing $100, then it's a lot cheaper than
Right.
running on other rails. But that's just one example of it.
Mm.
There's another project that is called so that's called Acru. There's another company called Onboard, is basically building a fully self-custody wallet using Privy. So you don't even need to memorize your seed phrase, using account abstraction there. And it's building an ecosystem of various types of dApps that offer the simple financial services that you need, but is not controlled by one company, it's multiple dApps.
Mhm.
So many want a super app. These guys are creating an experience of that, but through different apps. And the user experience is just so simple. It's like a very simple cash app, 3, 4 buttons that you kind of navigate using the same language normal people know how to use, but bringing people on chain.
Mm.
And this can scale around the world. And lastly, we have one amazing portfolio company called Honeycoin, and they are building the clearinghouse for crypto to fiat payments for the African market.
Mm.
So same way Lloyd's of London clears a lot of transactions around the world, they're basically creating the infrastructure for different amounts of capital to move around the continent and between the continent and the rest of the world at scale.
Mm.
So banks use them, fintech companies use them, traditional businesses use them to facilitate all types of payments. So it's a lot of fintech focus, but that's because that's where things are broken.
Mhm.
And if you unlock that, then you open up new types of economic activities.
Mm. How does your fund structure compare to how most crypto venture fund structures look?
Yeah, so we're set up as a 10-year fund, which is not that
Mm.
common in crypto. A lot of crypto projects are funds are 5 to 7 years.
Right.
Um, and that actually made it harder to raise, but it's a filter. You're
Mm.
either in to
Mhm.
build plumbing of a financial system,
Mm.
or we're here to play a speculative game.
Right.
To build anything great takes at least 10 years, but in
Mm.
realistically, like 15 years, right? And so
Mm.
you got to have the patience to stick around for that period of time.
Mm.
Um, and the other aspect is that, it's myself and my collaborator Andy, who's our CTO.
Mm.
Um, and we have a CTO as a fund because we believe in research. We believe in building simple technical infrastructure
Mhm.
and simple products, not things that are overly complex or overbuilt because it sounds great from raising
Mhm.
perspective. Um, we back long-term players in the landscape, and so we have a bias for survivors. So people who survive the hard times don't look the best in good
Mm.
times
Mhm.
alone. Um, and because there are not that many funds on the continent, we take our time.
Mhm.
Most projects we've backed, we've gotten to build relationships with the builders for at least 6 months and track them and understand a lot of what they optimize for, what they're building for. um, and lastly, we don't like overly monolithic ways of building. Sort of this approach that there should be only one empire. I don't think that's actually practically
Mm.
doable on the continent, but also it doesn't scale. It is hard for one company to build 5 to 10 amazing products across 50 jurisdictions and succeed in less than 10 years.
Mhm.
It's practically impossible,
Mhm.
right? So decentralization for us is not just a nice to have philosophical concept. It's actually a strategy. It's a strategy on how to build a very sophisticated financial stack for a billion plus people. Um, so yeah, we look at things from some of those principles.
Nice. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So you've been traveling a lot in these last few years, across a lot of the different crypto conferences, pop-up cities, residency programs. Like, I think you've seen in the inside of this crypto culture quite closely. Yeah, curious, like your reflections on where we are as a broader ecosystem, if it can even be defined in, a homogenous way like that. And yeah, any other observations or reflections?
Yeah, I've been fortunate to be a fly on the wall in many spaces in the last few years. I guess um, when I'm in amongst crypto folks, I tend to be the most skeptical voice, and when I'm in the non-crypto world, I am uh, helping explain what is really possible in the landscape.
Same for me. Same for me.
So I gamble both, and I guess I'm also wired to think like, what are we missing?
Mm,
Where could this go wrong? And what is the biggest blind spot that we have? So it is not critical from a place of I don't want this to succeed,
mm,
but basically closing as many doors that might harm the path, so that the path of least resistance
mhm.
is very clear.
Yeah.
Um, and I guess everyone makes trade offs, and the reason why I spend more time in the Ethereum world is because a lot of the trade offs are very clear and
Mm,
upfront. We're building a world computer and an open decentralized system, and it's the most resilient. Huge amount of decentralization, amazing talent, and a lot of developers. Things don't move as fast as some people want it to be. That's because it's not a company.
mm,
um, Companies are great for certain situations and conditions, right? So everyone makes different trade-offs, and I think
mm.
being very clear, I think, is really important.
Yeah.
I find ourselves often stuck between surviving or survival mindset
Mm,
based on token price, um, and keeping a lot of people engaged, and building something that can last 50 years, 100 years, right? And so, if you use the analogy of how people build cathedrals,
mhm,
um, you're never around to see the finished product.
mhm.
And that's fixed. That's true. right? And I think sometimes we still lack that way of thinking. Is that, yeah, many of us want to live forever or long, or longevity movement, but if we're actually coming back to building things that are beyond us and building a system that
Mm.
works for humans and is independent,
Yeah.
um, you optimize for different things. So balancing sort of the immediate hit that we need to keep people engaged,
Mm.
and what optimizes for actually building the foundations for the world supercomputer that's going to power a lot of our economic and non-economic activities.
Mhm.
I see these tension points keep coming up in different places,
Yeah.
and I see that as just as a motivation for me to just focus on what I'm doing, and make sure that we build it and use it in the right way to serve people, and we keep it alive. I think there's something beautiful and simple about Bitcoin, which I really like. It's just there's a lot that's unchangeable, right? And there's a place and role and value in it. Um, but for the things that change, it allows us to be responsive and creative, and keep layering new research, new innovations on top of the other.
Mm.
um, and that allows you to build like a very open, dynamic system,
Mhm.
which I think is what the space is. And I guess the last thing I'd say is like there's a lot of unsung heroes
Mm.
in the landscape,
Mhm.
and I was having a conversation with friends last night, just how I keep meeting just the nicest humans
Mhm.
who are in it for the right reasons, and many are like in different positions of power, and ask the deepest questions and are very self-critical.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, I think that's amazing, and I think we need more of that, and we need to shine the limelight more on those people.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I've had that experience multiple times at DevCon here where I find myself in a conversation and, like, a really good human, like, the
Right.
velocity of meeting, like, really, like, interesting people that have, like, a kindness of spirit and deep intellectual curiosity, an earnestness of doing good in the world, like, it's touching, because I certainly can get in my mind about what the space is doing right and wrong, and what are the gaps and the blind spots, and the cultural aspects that maybe are less resonant or whatever. But at the end of the day, like, people, and this does whatever's happening seems to be really attracting good people into the field.
Yeah, Sungi calls it the understory.
Mm.
There's the overstory and understory. The overstory is like the all the research, the technical advancement, the development, the application, the tools, the capital, all the things that we're putting out there.
Mm.
And the understory, it is the people,
Mhm.
it is the humans, right? And so I think that's the part that we keep missing as well, because what's happening at that layer gets reflected in what we build,
Mhm.
right? And so yeah, I think, you know, coming back to the Africa lens as well, I think the value of localizing our work, going back to the roots, right? We're trying to build trustless systems, but inherently it comes back to trust, right? And even in crypto, a lot of stuff happens due to trust,
Mm.
right? And trust happens at a very local level.
Mhm.
And so, um, yeah, like I want us to just not miss that small scale, heavily localized version of life, of daily activities, of our connection to nature, to food, to each other, to community, and because that's what that transcends to the larger systems that we build,
Mm.
right? And so, um, and if we're like hyper globalizing, being fully on chain, or living in the on chain economy and not having any sort of loyalty to some place, as some people do, we tend to miss the grounded nature
Right.
of being connected to space. And we see that manifested in a lot of experiments people are trying to do in charter cities or pop-up cities, or these are like inherent desires for locality.
Mm,
Sometimes it gets expressed in beautiful ways. Sometimes it's still finding itself. Um, but you see that need.
mm,
And so, I think if we don't pay attention to that, then, we can just be floating in ideas alone.
yeah. Well, so fun to watch the journey, Joseph. Getting the chance to see it from idea to being at your dinner the other night with a lot of these African builders, and just hearing the stories around the room, and so much love and appreciation for you and what you're bringing to those communities, and the role of the residency program, and obviously the capital and the funding. And yeah, I get the sense that this is still just very early days,
Just beginning.
but also incredible to see the amount of progress and the amount that you've been building so far, along with your team and your collaborators. How do people dive in to learn more? Where should they go to follow? And also, any final words you want to share?
Yeah, so people can follow our journey at lavavc.io on the Lava front. We have borderless.africa as our public good initiative. And they can follow stories and read about the projects people are building and the work over there. Um, and I guess the last thing I would say is that, um, connecting capital and the work and all of it, like I see, um, like if you're building a project and people are willing to pay for it, then that's a positive feedback loop of some value exchange
Mm,
happening there. Some people can pay in cash, some people can decide to pay in whatever, but having a creating value and having a positive feedback loop, I think is very critical,
mm,
right? And in a way, a lot of crypto-based projects, people are joking today, when I said, like, half our portfolio are profitable already at an early stage, and they're like, "What? You use the P word?" And people are laughing is because, profit is just one lens, but the idea that you're providing a service or a product to someone, and because they're deriving utility, they're willing to give you something for it.
mm,
I think that's a positive feedback loop for it,
mhm,
right? And so sometimes it's easy for us to kind of get carried away with magic money or sort of infinite ideas that we're developing.
mhm,
Um, and I think what Africa is doing and showing is that there's a ton of utility to be built, and there's fundamental problems people are trying to solve for. So people are building generational companies and businesses around it. And I think that sometimes gets missed in this sort of nebulous circles that we're kind of navigating around. And I think that's part of our contribution to the space is actually a lot of users in masses. We've got
mm,
1.5 billion and growing.
mm,
A lot of utility, and products that are uh, stacking to meet various types of needs, from financial services to identity to credentials to like communication and so on. Um, and I think there's a lot for us to see from the market and continent. And so I invite everyone to come spend time, meet with founders and builders, and connect with communities, and have a great time because, Africans have a great way to bring life and joy and laughter to everything people do. And I think that's part of our contribution to the world as well.
mm,
It's not just serious stuff,
mhm.
We gotta live, we gotta be present, we gotta be here.
Yeah.
And yeah, I feel great that a lot of our communities are doing both at the same time.
Mm. Well said. Thanks, Joseph.
Thank you.
So to dive in for more, just go to lavavc.io and borderless.africa. You might also be interested in the conversation we had with Andy Tudhope, the CTO at Lava, Yosef's collaborator. You can find that, as well as the conversation we had with Jambi Jeroge from Grassroots Economics. Definitely recommend checking that one out. All of our discussions are at maearth.com. And if you've been tuning in, thank you for being part of our journey. This is the completion of season 3. We'll do a recap, some sort of summary final video as well. But yeah, just appreciate the support. Please leave us likes, shares, comments. Your feedback means a lot to us, and I look forward to seeing you next year, 2025, in season 4. Thank you.